Brothers and sisters, on behalf of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, I would like to thank the organizers of Kashmir Solidarity Day 2021 for the opportunity to participate in this forum and to share a platform with President Masood Khan of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. I had the privilege several years ago of visiting Free Kashmir inside of Pakistan, where I observed the Kashmiris had all the rights of Pakistani citizens, plus special status under the Pakistani Constitution. On that occasion, the residents of Muzaffarabad and the students at the University of AJK used their political rights to speak out loudly against the ill treatment of their families on the other side of the line of control and to demand an end to the illegal Indian occupation. Last week, I was heartened to hear UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres offer his good offices to mediate between India and Pakistan in order to resolve their dispute over Kashmir. He pointed out that there was no military solution to the decades-old conflict and stated that any military confrontation between the two nuclear-armed powers would be, quote, a disaster of unmitigated proportions for both countries and for the entire world. I was heartened because the United Nations has rarely taken up the question of Kashmir at all during this century, even though it did the right thing more than 7 decades ago when the conflict first began. Canadians should be proud that it was a Canadian, General Andrew MacNaughton, who sat as President of the Security Council of the United Nations on December 22, 1949, and introduced a resolution in which the United Nations voted to authorize a referendum among the people of Kashmir about their political future. That was the right and democratic thing to do. And Secretary General Guterres last week reaffirmed that the solution to the conflict over Kashmir had to be based on that resolution and other UN resolutions. He also noted the human rights abuses that are taking place in Indian-occupied Kashmir that since the pre-COVID-19 lockdown that India imposed on the region on August the 5th, 2019, which abuses were subject to 2 damning reports by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2018 and then again in 2019. And Guterres observed that, quote, it's essential that human rights are fully respected in all the territories, end of quote. These were fine words by Mr. Guterres, and we Canadian activists hope he speaks out more about Kashmir in the years to come. However, we also realize that it's unlikely that the UN will take any collective action soon under the UN Charter to force India to offer a free and fair plebiscite to the people of Kashmir. Similarly, the Trudeau government makes a few feeble noises now and then to express its concern about the deteriorating human rights situation in Kashmir. For example, last November, the former Global Affairs Minister, Mr. Champagne, issued a mealy-mouthed response to 3 parliamentary petitions signed by 3,500 Canadians and sponsored by 3 different MPs, one from the Conservative Party, one from the Liberal Party, and another from the NDP. You should know that Ottawa is very quick to condemn alleged human rights violations in Venezuela, China, Russia, Iran, no matter how questionable the sources that are offered. But in response to the petitions and the solid and verifiable evidence of gross human rights violations committed under the illegal Indian occupation of Kashmir, Minister Champagne failed completely to rise to the occasion. The best he could come up with was that, quote, the government of Canada was monitoring the situation, many restrictions were lifted, and Canada looks forward to the restoration of normalcy and resumption of inclusive political dialogue in Jammu and Kashmir, end of quote. The sad truth is that unlike its predecessor government 73 years ago, the Trudeau government will not stand up to India and demand justice for Kashmir. Unfortunately, the Trudeau government does not follow an independent foreign policy, preferring instead to follow the dictates of Biden's Department of State, which cynically views India as an ally to be cultivated in its fight to contain the People's Republic of China. So what are we to do here in Canada when federal and international leaders fail in their duty to provide justice? I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, it's our duty as Canadians and members of humanity to step up to the plate and light a proverbial fire under the comfortable chairs of these leaders. The people of Indian-occupied Kashmir have been engaged in a huge and continuous resistance against the illegal Indian occupation for decades. The scale of the resistance is enormous. I note from the Kashmir Media Service that 308 Kashmiris have been martyred by the illegal Indian occupiers just since India imposed its pre-COVID lockdown on the region on August 5th, 2019. In addition, at least 1,701 people were critically injured due to the use of brute force, bullets, pellets, and tear gas shelling by Indian troops on peaceful demonstrators in the territory. The troops damaged over 993 houses and structures, molested 103 women, and arrested 14,489 people during this period of only a year and a half. These are astounding numbers and show that the justifiable resistance of the people of Kashmir is growing. Our job in Canada is to support this resistance. For many years, Canadian mainstream media, because of its stunning silence on the question of Kashmir, prevented us from gauging whether or not there was a constituency in this country on which to build a solidarity movement with Kashmir. However, when India imposed its lockdown on August 5th, 2019, effectively annexing Kashmir to India, tens of thousands of Canadians immediately hit the streets to protest. There were Muslim Canadians, Pakistani Canadians, and also members of the peace and labor movements represented in the crowd. And these protesters took to the streets on several occasions in many cities across the country. So now we know not only that there is a significant constituency in Canada for a solidarity movement with Kashmir, but it's also quite large in size. Under the conditions of the pandemic, it's impossible right now to call for large indoor or outdoor actions on this Kashmir Solidarity Day in support of the resistance to Indian illegal occupation. But there are many things we can still do from home. We can circulate more online parliamentary petitions like the 3 successful petitions of last year. We can virtually lobby politicians, especially opposition politicians, and put forward our case. We can join with the Canadian Friends of Kashmir to insert the issue of Kashmir into the widely expected upcoming federal election. We can write letters and opinion pieces to the editors of mainstream newspapers. We can hold online public forums and share a lot of information about the resistance to India's illegal occupation on social media. On this day of international solidarity, let's plan to redouble our efforts to help the people of Kashmir to throw off India's illegal occupation and to determine their own political future. Thank you very much for your kind attention.